Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of Canada, where the vast wilderness holds secrets far darker than the long winter nights. From the isolated cabins of the far north to the shadowed corridors of historic estates, these 10 disturbing true stories will reveal a side of the Great White North that tourist brochures dare not mention. You will hear accounts of entities that stalk through blizzards, voices that mimic the living to lure victims into the trees, and ancient evils that have terrorized communities for generations. These are not legends passed down through campfire tales. These are documented experiences from ordinary people who encountered something extraordinary and lived to tell about it. The Canadian wilderness is beautiful, serene, and unforgiving, but what lurks within its depths is far worse than any natural predator. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the frozen forests and forgotten settlements of Canada, where the cold is not the only thing that will freeze your blood. My name is Liam, and this happened when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep in the forests of northern Ontario. I had always loved the silence of the wilderness, the way the wind rustled through pine needles, and the smell of damp earth after a rainstorm. I wanted to escape the city's chaos, and this remote campsite seemed perfect. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun already sinking behind the trees, painting the forest in shades of gold and shadow. I set up my tent near a small creek and unpacked my gear. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. I thought I was alone, but as the light dimmed, I started noticing strange signs. Footprints in the mud that weren't mine, a faint scratching sound from the tree line, and the odd feeling of being watched. I tried to shrug it off, blaming it on fatigue, but then I noticed something else. The creek water, which had been still, suddenly rippled, as though something large had just moved through it. My heart began to race. I stepped back, telling myself it was probably an animal, deer maybe, or a raccoon. But something inside me whispered that it wasn't that simple. I decided to eat dinner quickly and head to sleep, hoping morning would bring clarity. But night in that forest would bring more than darkness. It would bring something I could never explain. Night fell quickly, and the forest transformed into a cathedral of whispers. The wind through the branches sounded almost like voices calling my name. I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but sleep didn't come easily. Then I heard it, a soft thump outside my tent. I froze. Another thump, followed by dragging sounds. Something, or someone, was moving cautiously around my campsite. I unzipped the tent slightly, peering out into the darkness. My flashlight cut through the night, illuminating nothing but trees swaying in the wind. The sounds had stopped. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. From the shadows, I glimpsed a figure, tall, thin, and hunched, standing perfectly still. Its face was obscured, but I felt its gaze pierce through the thin fabric of my tent. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and I realized I needed to get out. I packed my essentials quietly, hoping it would leave me alone. That's when I saw something even more terrifying. My footprints in the mud had multiplied. There were dozens of them now, leading in strange patterns away from my tent. I don't know if it was the same figure or something else entirely. But I knew one thing: I couldn't stay. I grabbed my backpack and started walking, trying to stick to the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. I stumbled through the forest, the crunch of dead leaves underfoot sounding deafening in the oppressive silence. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath. Every shadow seemed to twist and move, like the forest itself was alive. The footprints in the mud, my footprints, kept reappearing, no matter which direction I walked. They weren't my steps. They were too large, too deliberate. Then I heard whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs floating through the trees. I froze, straining to listen. They grew louder, echoing around me, circling me. Panic set in. My heart pounded so violently, I feared it might burst. I tried calling out, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. I ran blindly, hoping to reach a road or any sign of civilization, but the forest seemed endless. And then I saw lights, faint, flickering lights up ahead. I ran toward them, gasping, praying they weren't part of some cruel hallucination. As I got closer, the lights resolved into lanterns hanging from stakes in a small clearing. In the center was an abandoned campsite, similar to mine, but decades old, judging by the rusted gear and weathered tent remnants. And on the ground, dozens of human footprints, leading away into the dense forest, just like mine had multiplied. A chill ran down my spine. Whoever or whatever had made them wasn't human. I crouched behind a tree, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing mind. The clearing seemed deserted, yet the hair on my arms stood on end. Something about the arrangement of the campsite felt deliberate, ritualistic almost. The lanterns weren't placed randomly. They formed a circle like markers. I couldn't see beyond the first few feet, but I felt eyes on me. A snapping branch made me whip around. Nothing. Then the whispers returned, louder now, closer. The words were clear, but their meaning, I couldn't comprehend them. They didn't belong to any language I'd ever heard. Goosebumps prickled every inch of my skin. My rational mind screamed that I should leave immediately, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by fear and fascination. Suddenly, movement. A figure stepped out from behind the lantern circle. A man. No, something taller, skeletal, draped in tattered clothing that swayed with unnatural fluidity. Its face was a blur, a shadow that seemed to flicker in and out of focus. My stomach turned. I knew it was the same presence I had felt near my tent. I fumbled with my flashlight, shining it directly at the figure. For a brief moment, it froze, and I glimpsed its eyes. Hollow, black voids reflecting no light, no life. Then it vanished into the trees. I realized one terrifying truth. It had been following me all along. I ran without thinking, crashing through underbrush and tripping over roots. The forest had become a labyrinth. Every direction looked the same. The whispering followed me, now closer, sharper, almost mocking. My legs burned, lungs screamed, but fear pushed me forward. Suddenly, I tripped and fell near the edge of a frozen pond. My flashlight reflected off the ice, revealing more footprints. Not mine, not human, but the same large, deliberate prints. They led across the ice, straight toward the middle, where a single lantern flickered weakly. I considered turning back, but something compelled me forward. The air grew frigid, biting through my jacket. My breath hung in clouds, and every exhale sounded like a scream. As I stepped onto the ice, it creaked ominously. Then I saw it, an outline in the frozen water. A body, or something like one, trapped beneath the ice, distorted, twisted, and unrecognizable. A low guttural sound reverberated around me. The whispers formed words now. Join us, forever. I screamed and stumbled backward, almost falling into the icy water. Heart hammering, I turned, desperate to escape. But the forest had shifted. paths that had seemed familiar twisted into dead ends. Something was shaping the forest itself to trap me. Panic consumed me. If I didn't find a way out soon, I knew I'd become another footprint in the endless, multiplying trail. Desperation took over. I turned sharply and ran blindly through the trees, slipping on moss and ice. Every sound was amplified. The snapping of branches, my own ragged breathing, and that persistent whispering that now seemed to echo from all directions. I couldn't tell which way was safe, or if there even was a safe way. Then I saw it. A faint glow through the trees, a cabin, small and weathered, its windows dimly lit. Relief surged through me. I ran faster, hoping to find someone, anyone, inside. But as I approached, the front door slowly creaked open. There was no one. Inside, the cabin was empty, except for a single journal lying open on a dusty table. I stepped closer, scanning the pages. The entries were dated decades ago, describing campers who had vanished in the forest, just like me. The last line chilled me to the bone. They follow, they watch, and they wait. If you see their eyes, you are already chosen. A sudden movement behind me made me whirl around. The figure, the tall, skeletal one, stood just beyond the tree line, its hollow eyes glinting faintly in the cabin light. I froze, realizing that whatever this thing was, it didn't want me to leave. I bolted again, ignoring the journal. My only thought, survive. But the forest was no longer just trees and shadows. It was alive, hungry, and patient. I ran for what felt like hours. Every turn, every path, led me deeper into the forest. The whispers had changed. They were louder now, almost chanting. I could feel the forest itself shifting, guiding me towards something I didn't want to find. Then I stumbled into a clearing that I hadn't seen before. It was filled with abandoned tents, decayed camping gear, and human-sized footprints pressed into the snow and mud. My stomach turned. The realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't the first to be hunted, and I might not be the last. The skeletal figure emerged from the shadows, moving with unnatural speed. It circled the clearing, studying me. My flashlight flickered, and for a second, I saw its mouth. A gaping, hollow cavity, as if it had no face at all. Instinct took over. I sprinted again, following the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off snow. But the forest now felt endless. Every step seemed to loop back, leading me to the same clearing. And the whispers. They weren't just voices anymore. They were coming from the ground beneath me, from the trees above me, from everywhere at once. I realized something horrifying. I was trapped in a living nightmare, and the forest was deciding my fate. Exhausted, I collapsed near a snow-covered log. My body shook uncontrollably as I tried to catch my breath. I knew the figure was still watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I dared not move. Then, from the darkness, I heard a faint cry. Human, desperate, and real. I strained to see and noticed another camper, a young woman, bound and trembling behind a cluster of trees. Her eyes widened when she saw me. I wanted to help, but before I could move, the skeletal figure appeared between us. Its presence sucked the warmth from the air. The woman whispered something I couldn't understand, then pointed toward a narrow path barely visible in the snow. Something about her urgency told me I had no choice. I grabbed her hand and we ran. The forest seemed to resist us, branches scratching at our clothes, roots tangling our feet, whispers growing deafening. We stumbled into a small ravine and collapsed, panting and bleeding from cuts. Behind us, the forest was silent, too silent. I dared a glance back. No figure, no movement, just shadows stretching unnaturally. But then, footprints. Hundreds of them leading directly to us. They weren't ours. They never had been. We stayed in the ravine until dawn, too afraid to move. The whispers had vanished with the night, but the feeling of being watched remained. When the first light filtered through the trees, I dared to look around. The footprints had disappeared. Only our own remained, muddled and chaotic. We moved cautiously, following what we hoped was a path back to civilization. Hours passed. The forest seemed calm now, almost deceptively so. I kept glancing behind, expecting the skeletal figure to emerge from the shadows at any moment. Finally, we reached a ranger station. The warmth, the smell of fire, the sight of other humans. It was almost unbearable relief. We explained what had happened, but the rangers exchanged worried glances and muttered something about vanishing campers and the northern forest anomalies. They didn't elaborate. They didn't need to. I never went back to the forest, and I never will. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I can still hear the whispers, calling me back, reminding me that I was only ever allowed to leave because it was bored. Even now, months later, I can't forget. Friends asked me to share what happened, but I struggle to find the words. I know that forest is alive in ways humans can't understand, and whatever stalks it doesn't just watch, it learns, adapts, and waits. I've researched missing persons cases in northern Ontario, and patterns emerge. Footprints, whispers, vanished campers. The forest never shows itself fully. It's patient. It toys with its victims. Some say it's a spirit, others, a predator evolved beyond reason. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. The woman I escaped with? She vanished a few weeks later while hiking with friends. I don't know what happened to her. Sometimes I wake up and hear whispers, soft and insistent. I know the forest hasn't forgotten me. If you ever find yourself in a remote Canadian forest, alone at night, remember my story. And remember, when the trees seem to move, when shadows appear too long, when whispers echo where there should be silence, stop. Turn back. Because once you've been seen, once your footprints multiply, there may be no escape. My name is Rachel, and this happened when I traveled to the remote Yukon Territory to photograph the northern lights. I'd always been fascinated by the aurora borealis, the way the sky danced with green, purple, and gold. But I never imagined that chasing beauty could lead me so close to terror. I rented a small, isolated cabin miles from the nearest town. The first night, the sky was clear, the stars sparkling like a million diamonds. I set up my camera on a tripod, capturing the aurora as it shimmered overhead. I felt exhilarated, completely alone, and completely safe. Or so I thought. Around midnight, I noticed shadows moving on the edges of the tree line. At first, I thought they were trees swaying in the wind, but the shadows didn't move like branches. They slithered across the snow, unnaturally fluid, almost alive. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, perhaps a wolf, but the shadows never made a sound. I decided to retreat into the cabin, locking the door behind me. The aurora continued to dance outside, seemingly indifferent to the unease creeping inside. But as I sat by the fire, I glimpsed something at the window. Just a shape, dark, tall, impossible to make out in detail. And then it was gone. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. There was something out there, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stayed up the entire night, unable to shake the feeling that I was being observed. Every time I looked outside, the shadows seemed closer, lingering just beyond the tree line. My camera's viewfinder caught glimpses of shapes that my eyes couldn't fully see, figures that moved in ways that weren't natural. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps crunching on the snow. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the edge of the clearing. But nothing was there. Only the trees and the dancing lights above, serene yet mocking. My rational mind insisted it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., I heard a whisper outside the cabin door, almost like someone calling my name. I froze, heart pounding, and held my breath. It came again, closer this time. I wanted to open the door to see if someone was in trouble, but the voice sounded wrong, hollow, distorted, and impossibly cold. I backed away, fumbling for my phone. There was no signal. I was completely isolated. Then I noticed something on the snow outside. Footprints. Not human footprints. Tall, elongated, with long, claw-like toes. They led directly to the cabin door. I realized with horror, they weren't just observing me. They were coming for me. Fear made my hands tremble as I grabbed a lantern and slowly opened the cabin door. The cold night air rushed in, biting at my skin. Outside, the footprints stopped at the threshold, but the snow around them was disturbed in strange, circular patterns, like something had hovered there. I shone the flashlight toward the tree line, but the shadows had shifted. They weren't just at the edge anymore. They were closer, lurking between the trees, blending perfectly with the darkness. It was impossible to tell how many there were, or even where they began and ended. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door behind me, and the lantern flickered. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural hiss, rising and falling in the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I stumbled backward, tripping over a log and falling to the snow. The shadows seemed to respond, inching closer. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the cabin again, but the trees around me seemed to stretch unnaturally, forming a twisted corridor that funneled me toward the open clearing. The aurora above, once mesmerizing, now felt like a warning, its green light illuminating the tall, faceless figures that were beginning to surround me. For the first time, I understood. This forest wasn't just hiding something. It was alive, sentient, and it wanted me. I slammed the cabin door behind me and locked it, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure the shadows could hear it. I pressed my back against the door, trying to calm myself, but the whispers had returned. Soft, almost melodic at first, then rising into distorted, inhuman chants. I peered out the window. The shadows weren't moving conventionally. They seemed to glide, phasing between the trees with impossible speed. My flashlight flickered, and in that instant, I glimpsed something I will never forget. One of the figures turned its head toward me, but it had no face. Just a smooth, black void where features should be. I backed away, realizing that my camera, my lifeline, was still set up outside on a tripod. If I could just capture them on film, I might prove I wasn't hallucinating. But stepping outside meant certain exposure. I considered leaving the cabin entirely, running blindly into the snow. But instinct screamed that I'd be trapped immediately. They didn't just follow footsteps, they anticipated them. The aurora flickered violently above, as if reacting to my panic. And then I heard it. A soft scraping at the cabin wall, like long nails dragging across wood. Whatever was out there was learning me. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The forest was silent now, eerily calm, but I knew it was a trap. My eyes kept darting to the window, half expecting to see the faceless figures pressing against the glass. Suddenly, movement. One figure appeared, impossibly close, outside the front door. Its black void of a face seemed to stare directly at me, although it had no eyes. I stumbled backward, knocking over the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness. Panic overtook reason. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with essentials, and considered my only option: escape through the back. I crept quietly, every nerve on fire, trying to avoid the figure at the door. The aurora pulsed above, casting eerie shadows that seemed to follow me. I made it to the back door and threw it open. The snow was deeper than I anticipated, each step a struggle. The figure glided behind me, effortlessly, keeping pace without making a sound. Every time I looked back, it was closer. Faceless void staring, reaching, waiting. I ran blindly through the snow, adrenaline carrying me forward. Then I tripped, falling into a shallow ditch. My flashlight skittered across the snow, illuminating dozens of faceless shadows surrounding me, hovering silently. I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't escaping. I was entering their domain, and they had been waiting for me all along. Image prompt 5. 16:9, cinematic, ultra-realistic. I scrambled to my feet, snow soaking my clothes, lungs burning from cold and panic. The shadows moved in perfect synchronization, circling me like predators anticipating the kill. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the snow slowed my every step. Suddenly, I glimpsed a faint light in the distance, a frozen creek reflecting the aurora. It was my only chance. I ran toward it, slipping and falling, leaving deep impressions in the snow. The shadows followed silently, gliding above the snow, never leaving a mark, never breaking the surface. I reached the creek and paused to catch my breath. Then I saw them. Dozens of faceless shadows reflected in the ice, surrounding me completely. My own reflection stared back, distorted, with hollow voids where my eyes should be. My skin crawled. A guttural, inhuman hiss echoed through the clearing. The shadows began to move toward me simultaneously, their forms stretching unnaturally, as if to consume the space itself. I realized there was nowhere to hide. In a desperate moment, I lifted my camera and snapped a photo. The flash erupted, momentarily blinding me, and for the first time, the shadows recoiled, almost as if the light burned them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me a fleeting window of escape. Seizing the moment, I bolted across the creek, ice cracking beneath my feet. The shadows hesitated but didn't disappear. They seemed to stretch, reaching across the ice as if testing their limits. My heart pounded. Each step felt like a race against inevitability. I spotted a ridge in the distance, a natural barrier that might slow them down. I ran toward it, branches whipping against my face, snow soaking through my gloves. The whispers returned, louder, harsher, almost chanting my name. I could feel the forest closing in. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and tumbled down the ridge. Pain shot through my ankle, but I didn't stop. I crawled the last few meters and ducked behind a snowdrift, barely daring to breathe. The shadows passed by, gliding smoothly over the ridge, their hollow voids scanning, searching, unsatisfied. I stayed there for what felt like hours, shaking, praying that morning would bring salvation. As first light crept across the forest, the shadows began to fade, melting into the trees. They didn't vanish completely, though. I could still feel their presence, patient and lingering. It was then I understood. They weren't killing me tonight. They were marking me, watching, waiting for me to return. I limped back to the cabin, barely daring to look around. The snow was disturbed, but the shadows were gone, or at least hidden. I spent the rest of the morning packing my gear, trying to convince myself this was over. When I finally left the forest, I felt relief, but it was hollow. My camera had captured more than I expected. On the display, the photo I had taken of the creek showed dozens of humanoid forms reflected in the ice, their hollow faces staring directly at me. My stomach churned. Over the next few weeks, I researched similar reports. Tourists, hikers, and photographers disappearing in the Yukon, often near aurora viewing areas. Witnesses reported strange shadows, whispered voices, and faceless figures. My photo, I realized, was proof that what I saw wasn't imagined. At night, the shadows haunt my dreams. I see them in my periphery, gliding silently, watching. Sometimes, when I stare at the northern lights on my screen, I swear I see them moving there too. An inescapable presence linked to the aurora itself. I know one thing for certain. They are patient, and the forest never forgets. Anyone who enters their domain risks becoming another reflection in the ice. Months later, I returned to the city, but I could never shake the sense of being watched. The aurora borealis had become a symbol of dread for me. Every time I saw photos or videos, I felt the shadows lurking within, waiting, patient. I shared my experience online, but most people dismissed it as hallucination or fear-induced stress. Only a few responded with stories of their own, stories of figures, whispers, and faceless shadows in the northern wilderness. I realized I was far from alone, though many survivors were too scared to speak openly. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night to soft whispers in my apartment, voices echoing the cadence I heard in the Yukon. They aren't words I can understand, but the intent is clear. They're calling, reminding me that I was seen. The photo on my desk, the one with the shadows, remains a constant reminder. I don't dare leave it uncovered. Sometimes, when I pass by, I think I see the forms shift slightly, as if they are aware that I am looking. I don't know what they are, but I know that the forest, the aurora, and the shadows are all connected. And I know they are waiting for me or for the next unsuspecting traveler. Even now, years later, I am haunted. The photo remains, proof of what I can't explain. I've avoided the Yukon, avoided photography trips in the north, avoided the aurora entirely. But the memories linger like frost in my veins. I sometimes dream of the creek, of the snow, and of the faceless shadows gliding silently across the ice. In dreams, they are closer, surrounding me, their hollow voids closer than ever. I wake up sweating, heart hammering, and I know I cannot escape them. Even here, thousands of miles away. Friends ask why I never returned, why I don't share my story publicly. They don't understand that this is bigger than me, bigger than any photo, any video, or any report. The shadows are patient, calculating, and they don't forgive. The northern lights are no longer just beauty. They are a warning, a shimmer of green and purple that lures the unwary into the forest, into the domain of something ancient, something hungry and beyond human comprehension. If you ever find yourself under the aurora, alone in the wilderness, listen carefully. Watch for shadows that move unnaturally. Don't follow strange lights or sounds. And never, ever underestimate the forest or what waits in its depths. Because once you've been seen, you may never return. My name is Ethan, and I've always been drawn to abandoned places. The thrill of exploring the forgotten, the decayed, the haunted, whatever lurked in the shadows, had always fascinated me. But nothing I'd ever seen prepared me for the mine in northern British Columbia. It was a century-old silver mine, long sealed off after a series of mysterious disappearances. Locals whispered about strange sounds, ghostly figures, and a presence that lingered in the tunnels. I arrived at the entrance just before sunset, flashlight in hand, recording gear ready. My friends had warned me not to go alone, but curiosity outweighed caution. The entrance gaped like a black mouth in the mountainside. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was damp, musty, and smelled faintly of decay. My footsteps echoed down the narrow passageways. Every sound seemed amplified, bouncing off the wooden beams and jagged rock walls. As I ventured deeper, I noticed marks on the walls, scratches, claw-like gouges, as if something had tried to claw its way out. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, and I felt a presence following me, just beyond the edge of my light. Then I heard it. A faint whisper from deep within the mine, calling my name. The whispering grew louder, echoing through the mine like the walls themselves were speaking. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding every vein. I told myself it was my imagination, but instinct screamed otherwise. As I moved deeper, I stumbled upon old mining carts and rusted equipment scattered across the tunnel floor. Shadows stretched unnaturally in the beam of my flashlight. Every corner seemed alive, shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. I set up a camera, hoping to capture something, anything, to explain the feeling of being watched. The device immediately flickered, the screen distorting, showing static and fleeting glimpses of something moving just beyond the light. I froze, staring at it. The figure was tall, human-shaped, but its face was blurred, almost melted, impossible to distinguish. Then I heard a scraping sound behind me. I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, but there was nothing. Only the sound of my own panicked breathing. I realized that whatever was in this mine didn't move like a human. It slithered, glided, and could appear where it chose. My curiosity was morphing into fear. I could feel the mine itself watching, learning, and waiting for me to make a wrong step. I pressed forward, trying to convince myself I was still in control. The mine narrowed, forcing me to squeeze between walls, slick with moisture. The whispers were now accompanied by faint scratching, like nails on rock, echoing from the tunnels behind me. Suddenly, the floor beneath me shifted slightly, and I stumbled, catching myself on a protruding beam. The camera in my hand captured something I hadn't seen, a reflection of a face, pale and distorted, in a pool of stagnant water. I froze, paralyzed by fear. The whispering voice became clearer, almost intelligible. "You shouldn't be here," it said, hollow and cold, repeating over and over. My stomach churned. The deeper I went, the more the mine seemed to twist unnaturally. Corners appeared where none should exist. Tunnels doubled back impossibly, and shadows moved with an intelligence that terrified me. I realized with horror that the mine itself wasn't just abandoned, it was alive. Something ancient had claimed it, and I had just wandered into its domain. The scraping sound returned, louder this time, circling me. I swung the flashlight wildly, catching a fleeting glimpse of the figure, a tall, emaciated shape with clawed hands and hollow, black eyes, disappearing behind the walls as if it had never been there. I knew I needed to escape, but every tunnel I tried to take seemed to loop me back, as if the mine were intentionally trapping me. Panic began to consume me. My flashlight flickered, and the whispers became deafening, echoing from every direction at once. I ran blindly, skidding across puddles, bumping into walls and rusted carts. Each tunnel seemed identical, each turn disorienting. The mine itself had become a maze designed to trap me. Then I saw it. Symbols carved into the rock, glowing faintly, pulsating with a greenish light. They weren't just markings, they were warnings, or perhaps instructions. I couldn't decipher them, but instinct told me to avoid them. The figure emerged again, moving closer, gliding silently over the wet ground. Its hollow eyes locked on me, unblinking and merciless. I tried calling for help, screaming, but my voice was swallowed by the mine. The scraping noise was all around me now, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the tunnels. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't find the exit. In a brief moment of clarity, I realized the mine didn't want to kill me outright. It wanted to trap me, break me down, make me part of it. I grabbed the camera and ran toward a faint light ahead, a shaft of moonlight breaking through a collapsed section of the tunnel. It was my only chance, but I had no idea what awaited me outside. I scrambled through the collapsed tunnel section and emerged into the cold night air. The moon illuminated the mine's jagged entrance, but my relief was short-lived. The shadows had followed me. They hovered at the edge of the tree line, impossibly tall, faceless, watching my every move. I ran downhill toward a dirt road I hoped would lead to civilization, but the forest around the mine seemed alive. Trees bent subtly, branches scraping in rhythm with my racing heart. The whispering followed, a chorus of voices repeating my name, calling me back. Then I noticed something on the ground. Footprints. Dozens of them, elongated, clawed, appearing impossibly fast, matching the pace of the shadows. They weren't just following me. They were guiding me, or perhaps corralling me toward something worse. I stumbled and fell into a shallow creek. My camera skidded across the rocks, lens capturing a glimpse of the shadows reflected in the water. I froze, their forms elongated, distorted, gliding silently over the snow and ice, and the aurora above glowed faintly, casting an eerie green light across their faceless voids. I realized, with growing horror, that escaping the mine didn't mean I was safe. Whatever haunted the tunnels had marked me. It had learned my movements, tracked me, and waited for the moment it could claim me completely. I forced myself to keep moving, every step a battle against fatigue and terror. The forest around the mine was silent, too silent, as if the world itself had gone still to watch me. I dared not look back, but I could feel the shadow's presence, crawling across my vision, reaching for me even without touching. The dirt road twisted unnaturally, like it had no destination, looping back toward the mine entrance itself. I stumbled again, this time onto a patch of ice, sprawling across the ground. In the reflection, I saw them. Faceless figures, taller than trees, hovering just behind me. My chest tightened. I realized with dawning horror that they weren't limited to the mine. Wherever I went, they could follow. My mind raced, trying to think of any rational explanation. Animals, hallucinations, exhaustion. But nothing made sense. The footprints on the ground repeated in impossible patterns, sometimes leading me forward, sometimes circling back, as though the shadows were orchestrating my every move. Then a low, guttural hiss filled the air. It wasn't a sound that came from their mouths. It came from the forest itself, the very trees and rocks vibrating with it. My camera slipped from my grip as I sprinted blindly toward a faint light in the distance. I didn't know if it was a road, a town, or another trap, but it was my only chance. The faint light grew stronger as I ran. It seemed almost unnatural, like a beacon designed specifically for me. Every shadow I passed shimmered and warped in the glow, as if aware of my fear and feeding off it. I reached a clearing and froze. In the center was an old, weathered mining shack, partially collapsed, windows shattered, door hanging off its hinges. Yet light poured out from within, warm and inviting in contrast to the icy darkness outside. My instincts screamed that this was a trap, yet exhaustion and desperation forced me forward. Inside, the air was stale but free of shadows, for now. I stumbled over broken furniture and old crates, finally collapsing against a wall. My camera, still recording, lay on the floor. The faint greenish glow of the carved symbols from the mine reflected off the metal objects inside. Then I heard it, the unmistakable scraping sound, slowly circling the shack. My blood ran cold. The shadows had found me again, drawn to the light like moths. I wanted to flee, but every path I considered seemed blocked. I realized something terrifying. This place wasn't just haunted, it was alive, a predator, and I was prey. The scraping sound intensified. I clutched my flashlight, swinging it toward the windows. Outside, the shadows waited silently, impossibly still. I could feel their attention focused entirely on me. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I scanned the room, desperate for an escape route, and noticed a trap door partially hidden under a pile of debris. It led downward into what appeared to be the mine's lower tunnels. I hesitated, knowing the mine itself had been the source of my nightmare. But the shadows were closing in. With no other option, I pried open the trapdoor and descended. The ladder creaked under my weight, each rung threatening to give way. The darkness below was absolute. I flicked on my flashlight, illuminating jagged rock walls and pools of water reflecting faint light from above. The whispers returned, echoing off the walls, overlapping and twisting into a terrifying cacophony. I moved carefully, heart pounding, knowing the shadows could be anywhere, waiting to strike. Then I glimpsed something. Claw marks along the walls, fresh and deep. My camera flickered to life on its own, capturing the moment I saw multiple elongated, faceless figures moving just beyond the beam of light. I realized with horror that the mine had never been abandoned. It had been waiting for someone like me, and now I was exactly where it wanted me. I stumbled deeper into the tunnels, every step echoing loudly. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting, vibrating through the very rock. Shadows appeared and disappeared, testing my resolve, guiding me like a predator playing with prey. Ahead, I noticed a faint exit, a shaft leading to the surface. Relief surged through me, but the mine wasn't finished. As I ran, the walls seemed to close in, twisting unnaturally. The shadows elongated, stretching toward me, their hollow voids fixed on my terrified form. I reached the top of the shaft and scrambled out into a moonlit clearing. The cold air hit me like a wave. For a moment, I thought I had escaped. But then I saw them, the faceless figures hovering at the edge of the forest, motionless but impossible to ignore. I realized the terrifying truth. The mine had marked me. Wherever I went, they would follow. They were patient, waiting, calculating. The forest, the tunnels, the very land itself had become a prison I could never truly leave. I collapsed, shivering, as the aurora faintly illuminated their forms. I had survived, but at what cost? The shadows had learned my fear, and now I carried it with me forever. I eventually made it back to civilization, but the sense of being watched never left me. The shadows had followed me, lurking just out of sight, in peripheral vision, in reflections, in every dark corner. I kept my camera footage as evidence. but no one wanted to believe it. At night, I dream of the mine, of clawed marks, of faceless figures gliding silently across the rock walls. Sometimes I wake to scratching at the windows of my apartment, faint whispers echoing my name. I've moved cities, changed routines, yet the shadows are patient. They remember, they track, they wait. The mine in northern British Columbia was no ordinary abandoned place. It was alive. It was a trap. It was hungry. And I was its chosen witness, its marked prey. I warn anyone drawn to abandoned places, anyone seeking thrill in forgotten tunnels. Curiosity may be fatal. The shadows never rest. And neither can you, once you've seen them. Even now, I keep my camera close. Sometimes, in its recordings, I see movement in corners I know should be empty. The mine, the shadows, the darkness, they are not finished with me. If you ever feel compelled to explore the abandoned, remember my story. Some places are better left alone, because once you're marked, there is no escaping. My name is Sarah, and I've always been fascinated by the sea. But nothing drew me like the old lighthouse on Blackstone Point, perched on jagged cliffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Built in the 1800s, it had been abandoned for decades after the mysterious disappearance of its last keeper. Locals whispered about screams carried by the wind and flickering lights in stormy nights. I arrived at dusk, camera in hand, determined to explore and document what remained. The lighthouse stood tall, weather-beaten, its paint peeling, windows shattered, and iron railing rusted. As I climbed the rocky path, the wind howled like a chorus of voices warning me to stay away. The door creaked open with a heavy push. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, and the smell of salt and decay was overwhelming. Each step on the spiral staircase echoed like a heartbeat. The air grew colder the higher I climbed, and I could feel a presence, watching, waiting. At the top, the lantern room offered a panoramic view of the stormy sea. But then I saw it. A shadow, fleeting, moving across the broken glass panels. It wasn't human. It was taller, wider, and moved too fluidly to belong to any normal figure. A chill ran down my spine. The lighthouse wasn't just abandoned, it was alive. And I had just become its newest visitor. I fumbled with my camera, trying to capture the shadow, but it vanished the moment I aimed the lens. The wind outside howled like a living creature, rattling the broken panes and making the lantern room feel like a cage. I descended slowly, each step feeling heavier. Whispers seemed to curl around me, echoing off the stone walls. They were soft at first, almost indecipherable, then grew into a chorus. Leave, leave, or stay. I froze, wondering if I had imagined it. But the staircase creaked behind me, as if footsteps followed my every move. Halfway down, I noticed scratches on the wall, deep, jagged marks, like claws had gouged the stone. My stomach churned. The air thickened, heavy with a metallic tang I couldn't place. Something about the lighthouse didn't want visitors. It resented them, and it had a way of making you pay. I reached the entry hall and stumbled upon a tattered journal. The entries were cryptic, written by the last keeper. Lines described voices from the sea, shadows moving against the light, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. The final entry ended abruptly. They are not human. They wait for the storm. I shivered. Reading those words made me realize that I wasn't alone in the lighthouse, and that whatever haunted it wasn't satisfied with just existing here. The wind picked up, rattling the lighthouse violently. I realized the journal wasn't just a historical artifact. It was a warning. I tried to leave, but the entry hall seemed larger than before, the walls stretching subtly, bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. The whispers became voices, overlapping, almost chanting my name. My flashlight flickered. In one moment of clarity, I saw a figure in the corner. Tall, humanoid, but its face was featureless, smooth as marble. Its movements were unnerving, sliding across the floor rather than walking. I backed away, tripping over a broken chair. The shadow followed, gliding silently behind me. I noticed the walls of the lighthouse seemed to pulse, the cracks and broken paint rippling like water. Every instinct screamed to run, but the door at the base now seemed impossibly far away, as if the lighthouse itself had rearranged its interior to trap me. Desperation clawed at me. I ran up the stairs again, seeking the lantern room, hoping I could signal someone with the remaining light. The shadow followed, persistent, patient, and impossibly silent. When I reached the top, I froze. The room was empty, but not empty. Reflections in the broken glass showed dozens of shadowy figures behind me, stretching impossibly tall, faceless, and watching. I was surrounded, yet none moved. Waiting for me to make a wrong move, I realized the shadows weren't attacking yet. They were observing, studying me. Panic surged. I remembered the journal, and one line stood out. "The storm feeds them. Light drives them away." I grabbed the remaining lantern and waved it frantically, hoping to repel them. The shadows recoiled slightly, their forms flickering like smoke. It bought me a moment, enough to dart toward the spiral staircase leading down. But the lighthouse itself seemed to resist, stairs stretching, bending, trapping me in an endless loop. Every step echoed, but the shadows didn't follow conventionally. They glided through walls, ceilings, and floors, always close, always patient. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, matching the rhythm of the crashing waves outside. I reached a small maintenance hatch I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a narrow shaft leading outside, but I could feel the wind carrying a whisper directly to my ear. "You cannot leave." I took a deep breath, crawled into the shaft, and emerged onto the cliffs. The ocean roared beneath me. Relief surged, but it was short-lived. The shadows had followed, gliding silently over the jagged rocks, faceless forms stretching across the moonlight. I ran toward the edge of the cliffs, searching for a path down to safety, knowing the lighthouse had claimed another victim. But I refused to be its next. The cliffs were treacherous, each step threatening to send me plunging into the icy ocean below. I could feel the shadows closing in, stretching over the rocks, moving faster than any human could. The wind carried their whispers, now unmistakably a chant of my name, growing louder with every step. I stumbled onto a narrow ledge, ice and spray, making it slick. One misstep would mean certain death. The lighthouse behind me pulsed faintly, greenish light flickering in rhythm with the waves. A beacon for the shadows. I glanced back. The faceless form seemed almost to hesitate, as if bound to the cliffs by some invisible tether, their attention split between me and the lighthouse. I realized I might survive, but only if I could put enough distance between me and the structure itself. Desperation fueled me. I ran blindly down the path toward a small cove below, rocks cutting into my hands and knees. The shadows moved in perfect silence, circling, probing, testing my resolve. Finally, I reached the water's edge. The tide was rough, waves crashing violently, but it was my only escape. I dove in, letting the ocean swallow me, hoping the shadows wouldn't follow. As I struggled to reach the surface, I heard it one last time. The whisper, cold and hollow. "We'll be waiting." I broke through the waves, gasping, knowing the lighthouse still loomed behind me, and the shadows would never truly let me go. I floated in the icy water, waves thrashing me against jagged rocks. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. The shadows remained at the cliff edge, silent and unmoving, yet I felt their gaze piercing through the storm. Every instinct screamed to swim further. Yet the lighthouse loomed like a predator waiting for me to tire. Finally, I managed to pull myself onto a rocky outcrop. I collapsed, shivering uncontrollably, soaked through. My camera had fallen into the water somewhere, leaving me blind to the evidence of what had just happened. The storm raged above, lightning illuminating the lighthouse in brief, terrifying flashes. Then I heard it. A scraping, like claws on stone, moving along the cliffside toward me. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling down a narrow path toward the forest at the base of the cliffs. Each step felt like the shadows were anticipating my movement, adjusting their positions, always just out of reach, yet always present. I realized that the lighthouse didn't just haunt the cliffs. It controlled the environment around it, bending reality, feeding off fear. Escaping meant more than swimming. It meant surviving the very land itself. I reached the forest at the cliff base, branches scraping against me like fingernails. My breath came in ragged gasps. I dared not stop. The whispers persisted, echoing through the trees. Occasionally, lightning revealed glimpses of the shadows stretching between the trunks, impossibly tall and featureless. I stumbled into a small abandoned shack, its roof barely intact. I barricaded the door with rotting planks, listening as the storm and shadows pressed against the walls. The air inside smelled of salt, mildew, and something else. Something metallic like blood. As I caught my breath, I realized the shadows weren't just outside. They had begun to infiltrate the shack. Faint distortions appeared in corners, shapes shifting with impossible fluidity. I could see them in peripheral vision, dissolving when I looked directly. Frantically, I searched for anything to defend myself. I found an old lantern and a rusted crowbar. My hands shook as I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Somehow, I knew that to survive, I had to face the lighthouse, not run forever. I stepped outside, storm lashing me, waves crashing below, shadows encroaching. The lighthouse gleamed ominously above, windows flickering with greenish light. Whatever had haunted this place for decades was awake, and it was watching me. I climbed back toward the lighthouse, every step a battle against exhaustion and fear. The storm seemed to anticipate my path, lightning striking dangerously close, wind pushing me sideways. The shadows followed, sliding over rocks and tree branches, never touching, yet always threatening. When I reached the spiral staircase at the base, I noticed the door slightly ajar, though I had closed it earlier. The air inside was warmer, but carried a palpable weight, oppressive and suffocating. My lantern flickered as I ascended the stairs. The higher I went, the more the shadows distorted reality. The walls bent, staircases looped, and whispers filled every corner, chanting my name, mocking my terror. The lantern room was ahead, pulsing faint green light. I knew the final confrontation awaited. At the top, the shadows materialized fully. Dozens of faceless forms glided silently, surrounding me. My crowbar felt useless, but the lantern's light seemed to repel them slightly. Their shapes twisted and convulsed, revealing elongated limbs, claws, and hollow voids where faces should have been. I realized the lighthouse itself was their anchor. Destroy it, or its light, and the shadows might dissipate. But the structure was ancient, immovable. The storm was part of it. The cliffs, the walls, and the wind itself. A trap centuries in the making. Desperation consumed me. I swung the lantern, and for a moment, the shadows shrieked silently, recoiling. I searched the room, hoping to find something, anything, that could end this nightmare. In a corner, partially hidden under debris, I found an old oil drum and remnants of flammable liquid. If I could ignite it, maybe the fire would destroy the lantern room, severing the shadow's anchor. My hands shook as I set it up, praying the storm wouldn't extinguish the flames before I could act. As I lit a match, the shadows surged, gliding across the walls, windows, and floors, converging on me. Their faceless forms twisted impossibly, stretching toward the lantern's flame. I struck the match, igniting the liquid. Fire erupted, flames licking the ceiling and shattering glass. The shadows screamed, an impossible hollow sound, evaporating into smoke and light. I ran down the staircase, the structure creaking, smoke filling the spiral. Behind me, the lighthouse groaned as the fire consumed the upper floor. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the collapsing tower. I made it outside, coughing, burning, but alive. The shadows dissipated, or so I thought. The wind carried faint whispers, even as the fire died, and I knew the lighthouse had marked me forever. The lighthouse burned behind me, collapsing into the sea with a deafening roar. I stumbled onto the cliffs, chest heaving, soaked by rain and sweat. For a moment, relief washed over me. I had survived. But as I looked back, the shadows lingered at the cliff's edge, partially obscured by smoke and mist, faceless, patient, and waiting. I realized survival didn't mean freedom. The lighthouse had been their anchor, yes, but their essence was now part of me. Wherever I went, the shadows would follow, lurking just beyond my sight. I returned to civilization, but sleep became impossible. In dreams, the lighthouse rose again from the cliffs, its windows glowing green. Faceless figures glided silently through my apartment, standing in corners, whispering my name. The fire had destroyed the structure, but it hadn't destroyed the curse. The shadows existed in the storm, in the wind, in every abandoned place I approached afterward. They were eternal, patient, feeding off fear, and I was now part of their story. If you ever find yourself drawn to abandoned lighthouses, to stormy cliffs, remember my warning. Some places are alive in ways you cannot comprehend. Curiosity can be fatal, and once you've been marked, there's no escaping. Even now, when the wind whistles through my window, I hear the faintest scraping of claws against stone, and I know they're waiting. My name is Jason, and I've been an avid hiker and camper for years. But nothing could have prepared me for the horror I experienced at an isolated cabin deep in Algonquin Park. I had heard rumors of the place, stories of hikers who vanished or returned terrified. But I was skeptical. Adventure called, and I ignored the warnings. The cabin sat on a clearing surrounded by dense forest. Its wooden planks were weathered and gray, moss crawling up the sides. A narrow path led to it, almost invisible beneath fallen leaves. As I approached, the forest grew unnaturally silent, as if holding its breath. Even the wind seemed hesitant to disturb the trees. Inside, the cabin smelled of mildew and decay. Broken furniture was scattered across the floor, and a thick layer of dust suggested no one had been here for years. Yet, as I set down my backpack, I noticed something strange. The faint scent of smoke, like a fire had recently burned here. I shrugged it off, attributing it to forest fires or campers passing through. But as night fell, the darkness pressed in. Shadows moved unnaturally across the walls, and the wind carried whispers that didn't belong to the forest. Soft, beckoning, almost human, yet hollow. I realized, too late, that I wasn't alone in the cabin. Something had been waiting for me. Patient and hungry, the night grew darker, and I could barely make out the shapes inside the cabin. The whispers intensified, seeming to come from all directions at once. I clutched my flashlight, sweeping it over the room, revealing cobwebs, splintered furniture, and strange scratches along the walls. I heard a soft creak behind me and spun around. Nothing. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. I began to question my sanity. Then I noticed the fireplace. Embers glowed faintly, though I hadn't lit a fire. The scent of smoke grew stronger, acrid and unnatural. A shadow moved across the room, a figure, thin and elongated, gliding rather than walking. Its face was obscured, a dark void where features should be. I froze, heart hammering. It didn't attack, but its presence filled the room, pressing against me with invisible weight. I remembered tales of Algonquin Park's haunted cabins, and I felt the undeniable truth. These were not mere stories. Whatever lingered here had been feeding, waiting for its next visitor. I tried to leave, but the door refused to budge. The cabin seemed to pulse subtly, the walls stretching and compressing, trapping me inside. Panic set in. I was alone, yet surrounded by something that defied explanation. I scrambled to the window, hoping to escape through the cracked frame. Outside, the forest was unnaturally still, shadows pooling beneath trees despite the moonlight. The whispers followed me, growing louder, chanting in a distorted rhythm I couldn't decipher. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Tall, faceless, moving with impossible speed. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose floorboard. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness, I felt cold fingers brush against my shoulder. I screamed and swung the light. Nothing, but the sensation remained, a weight on my skin, cold and heavy. The cabin was alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind seemed deliberate, orchestrated to drive me into panic. I backed into the corner, noticing an old journal on a table. The pages were brittle, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. One passage stood out. They watch, they wait, they feed on fear. Once you enter, the forest itself becomes their ally. I realized I wasn't merely trapped by a haunted cabin. The forest, the shadows, the whispers, all were connected, part of a single, ancient entity. My only chance was to understand the rules of this nightmare before it consumed me completely. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to think. The journal hinted at a ritual, a way to survive the night by confronting the shadows rather than running. I read aloud the strange incantations, voice trembling. The shadows recoiled slightly, flickering as though reacting to my words. I realized that light also had power. The flashlight, though weak, could repel them temporarily. I moved toward the center of the cabin, placing candles I found on a dusty shelf in a rough circle. The shadows hovered at the edges, whispering, stretching, testing the barrier I had created. Time became distorted. Minutes felt like hours. Every so often, lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin and revealing more shadows. Dozens of faceless forms, all waiting for me to falter. One came too close, stretching through the barrier. I swung the flashlight desperately, and it recoiled, melting into the dark corners. I understood that survival required more than defense. I had to leave. But every door and window now appeared farther away, twisted, almost unreachable. The cabin itself was a labyrinth, alive and aware, guiding me toward terror at every step. Finally, I spotted a trap door beneath a table. It led down into a crawl space I hadn't noticed. It might be my only chance to escape the cabin, and perhaps the forest itself. I crawled through the trap door, finding a narrow, damp tunnel leading underground. The air was thick, suffocating, smelling of mildew and something more metallic. The whispers followed, muffled now, but no less menacing. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting unnaturally. Shadows followed, gliding over walls and floor, their forms warping with every turn. I realized I wasn't just running through a tunnel. I was navigating the cabin's memory, the forest's malevolent will, a maze designed to break intruders. Ahead, a faint light glimmered, almost beckoning. I pressed forward, crawling over rocks and debris. Each step felt heavier, the shadows testing me, probing my resolve. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of elongated faces, gaping voids, claws scraping walls. Finally, I emerged into a small cavern beneath the forest, with a narrow path leading upward. Relief surged, but the whispers intensified. The cavern itself seemed alive, breathing, pulsating in rhythm with my heartbeat. I realized the cabin's reach extended even underground. I clutched my backpack tightly, trying to maintain calm. Every instinct screamed to run, but the shadows had adapted, predicting my movements. Survival meant cunning, speed, and luck. One wrong turn, and I'd be lost forever, a permanent inhabitant of this nightmare. I emerged from the tunnel into a narrow path flanked by towering pines. The forest was alive in an unnatural way. The wind carried whispers, leaves rustled despite still air, and shadows stretched along the trunks, pulsing and twisting. Every instinct screamed to run. But I had learned the forest fed on panic. I cautiously moved forward, trying to focus on the moonlight filtering through the branches. The shadows seemed hesitant, almost curious, maintaining distance as if studying my behavior. I realized this was a test. One wrong move, one stumble, and the shadows would strike. Ahead, I spotted a faint glimmer of light, a ranger's cabin far in the distance. Hope surged through me, but the path seemed to shift with every step. Rocks appeared where there were none, tree roots twisted unnaturally, and the forest seemed to elongate, turning a short path into a nightmare labyrinth. The shadows followed, silent, patient, slipping between trees, observing. I had to keep my focus. I whispered the incantations from the journal, praying the protection spells worked outside the cabin. The shadows hesitated slightly, giving me a narrow margin to advance. I moved faster, weaving through the warped forest. The ranger's cabin was closer, but I knew the forest and the cabin were bound together. My escape depended on outsmarting an entity far older and smarter than I could imagine. The shadows grew bolder as I approached the ranger cabin, gliding faster now, testing my limits. I could hear them whispering my name, each syllable twisting into a mockery of fear. My legs burned, but I forced myself to keep moving, praying the incantations would hold. Suddenly, the forest seemed to close in. Trees shifted positions, creating dead ends and narrow passages. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands and knees on rocks and roots. The shadows circled me like predators, their faceless voids pressing against the edges of my vision. I realized the journal's protection spells might work beyond the cabin only if I maintained my focus. Every glance over my shoulder threatened to break the illusion. I refused to look back, despite the sensation of invisible hands grazing my skin. The ranger cabin was now visible in full. Its porch light flickered, weak but alive, a beacon of safety. I pushed myself harder, adrenaline carrying me over the last stretch. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached the cabin door and threw it open. Inside, warmth and light enveloped me, and for the first time since entering the forest, I felt something resembling safety. But even here, the shadows lurked beyond the windows, waiting, watching, plotting. I slammed the door shut, locking it, and collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The shadows pressed against the cabin walls, moving like smoke, distorting the windows. The warmth inside felt fragile, a thin barrier against the darkness outside. I gathered my courage and checked the journal again. The final instructions hinted at a permanent safeguard. A circle of fire around the cabin would repel the shadows, at least temporarily. I scavenged lanterns and matches, dashing outside into the chilling wind. As I lit a circle of flames, the shadows recoiled violently, shrieking in a silent, deafening chorus. Trees bent, leaves whirling in unnatural patterns, as if the forest itself mourned their retreat. The protective circle held, giving me a moment to breathe. But the whispers persisted, now mocking and closer, suggesting the shadows had not entirely left. I realized this wasn't over. The cabin, the forest, and the shadows were intertwined in a malevolent cycle. Every future camper would be drawn into this nightmare unless they understood the rules and survived. I spent the night in the cabin, never leaving the circle of fire, listening to the storm howl outside. Shadows lurked beyond the flames, silent and patient, waiting for any lapse in my vigilance. I survived, but the experience changed me forever. Dawn arrived, the storm receding, and the shadows retreated into the forest. The cabin stood as a fragile sanctuary. Exhausted, I surveyed the damage. Branches broken, leaves scattered, and faint scorch marks from my protective fire. I realized the forest had tested me, marking my endurance and cunning. The shadows weren't just random monsters. They were guardians of a dark secret, feeding on fear, but bound to certain rules. My survival depended on understanding these rules and respecting the boundaries. I ventured outside cautiously, keeping the fire circle in mind as a guide. The forest appeared calmer in daylight, though its silence was unnatural, oppressive. Every rock, tree, and shadow seemed poised to ensnare the unwary. I knew leaving the cabin meant continuing the ordeal, but I had no choice. I followed a narrow trail leading to the main park road, keeping a wary eye on the tree line. Occasionally, I glimpsed fleeting movements, elongated, faceless forms observing from a distance. The forest itself seemed to pulse with life, aware of my every step. Finally, I reached the park road, the familiar sight of vehicles and hikers restoring a semblance of normality. But even as I left, I felt the weight of unseen eyes, a permanent reminder that some forests harbor things beyond comprehension. I returned to civilization physically unharmed, but mentally scarred. Sleep came in fragmented bursts, filled with shadows and whispers. Even months later, I could feel their gaze, lingering at the edge of my vision, a constant reminder that Algonquin Park's cabin had marked me. Friends asked about my trip. I lied, telling them I had rough camping experiences, brushing off their curiosity. But I knew the truth. The shadows were patient, eternal, and I would never truly be free. I sometimes revisit the journal in secret, studying the incantations and protective measures. I've learned that the shadows respect structure and ritual. Any lapse in caution could mean being drawn back, pulled into their twisted game. Sometimes, at night, I see glimpses of elongated, faceless figures in my peripheral vision. I hear whispers in my apartment, carried on the wind, mimicking the forest's voice. I have come to accept that my encounter did not end at the cabin. It followed me, a permanent presence. If you ever plan to hike or camp in remote parts of Algonquin Park, heed my warning. Some places are alive, and some shadows are patient. Respect the forest, respect the rules. Curiosity may cost more than you can imagine. I survived the cabin, but it changed me forever. And I know that the forest and its shadows are still waiting. My name is Sarah, and I've been a long-haul trucker for nearly a decade. I've seen snowstorms that could bury entire towns and roads so icy that even the bravest would hesitate. But nothing prepared me for what happened on the remote stretch of Highway 11 in northern Ontario that winter. It began on a frigid, moonless night. The highway was empty, a ribbon of black ice stretching into infinity. My truck's headlights cut through the snow, reflecting off the frozen asphalt like icy mirrors. Everything felt normal, yet there was an oppressive silence that pressed against my chest. No wind, no wildlife, no other vehicles. Just an unnatural quiet. As I drove, I noticed something in the distance, a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a stranded motorist, but as I drew closer, I realized it wasn't human. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, almost robotic. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel its eyes on me, though it didn't move as I approached. I slammed the brakes, the truck skidding violently on the ice. I expected it to dodge, but it remained frozen, staring as though daring me to hit it. My heart raced. Something about this figure was wrong, so wrong it didn't belong in this world. I tried to swerve, but the ice had other plans. The truck slid uncontrollably toward the figure. Heart pounding, I jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding it. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, but the figure was now closer, impossibly near, as if it had teleported. I slammed the horn, but it didn't react. Its presence radiated something unnatural, cold that seeped into my bones, a fear that clawed at my mind. I realized I wasn't dealing with a person. This was something else, something patient and predatory. I decided to drive past, praying I wouldn't collide with it. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Another figure had appeared in the distance, far behind, blocking the road I had just passed. My heart raced faster. The highway seemed endless, yet these figures appeared wherever I went, moving impossibly fast, defying the laws of nature. Each time I tried to escape, another appeared. Their faceless hoods glowed faintly in the reflection of my headlights, a sickly green hue that burned my eyes. I realized this was no accident. I was trapped. Something had chosen me that night, and it was determined to make me its prey. I pressed the accelerator, hoping speed would break the spell, but the ice was slicker than ever. The figures multiplied, appearing in mirrors, along roadside trees, and even faintly in the sky, reflected on ice patches. Panic overtook me, my breathing ragged. Suddenly, a massive shadow loomed over the truck. The headlights revealed nothing solid, just a distortion in the air, like heat waves over asphalt, but freezing cold. My instruments flickered, then died, leaving me in darkness. I heard a soft scraping sound along the truck's exterior. It was subtle, almost polite, yet horrifying. I wanted to look out the window, but instinct told me not to. The air inside the cab grew colder, my breath visible in long, jagged clouds. Then, the impossible happened. The hooded figures were inside the cab. I didn't see them enter. I only felt their presence, pressing down, a suffocating force that twisted my vision. Their whispering voices, hollow and distorted, filled my ears. I realized there was no highway, no ice, no escaping. I was trapped in a liminal space between reality and something far older and crueler, a place where the road itself became a cage. I forced myself to look at the nearest figure. Its face was a void, a black, empty pit that seemed to pull at my soul. The whispers intensified, now unmistakable words. "You belong to us, forever." I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. My hands were frozen to the wheel, my body rigid. The dashboard flickered briefly, displaying a distorted map. The highway twisted into impossible angles, roads overlapping themselves like a shattered mirror. The truck lurched violently. I felt the vehicle tilt as though gravity itself had been altered. I struggled to maintain control, but it was useless. The figures guided the truck, bending reality, leading me toward some unknown destination. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The world outside the windows became a blur of snow, shadows, and green light. My mind teetered on the edge of collapse. I realized the figures didn't just want to kill me. They wanted me trapped, aware, terrified, a permanent witness to their existence. I glimpsed a structure ahead, a small, abandoned rest stop glowing faintly in green light. It radiated the same unnatural energy as the hooded figures. My gut told me it was the epicenter, the source of this nightmare. I tried to resist, but the truck slid toward the rest stop with inexorable force. Snow churned violently, wind howling, headlights flickering. I realized the rest stop wasn't just a building, it was a portal, a threshold between the real world and whatever realm these figures inhabited. Inside the cab, the figures multiplied, whispering and pressing closer. I could feel the weight of them, their cold essence sinking into my skin. Panic clawed at me, but I remembered a trick I had read about surviving supernatural encounters: confrontation. I shouted, demanded they leave me alone. The whispers faltered, as if surprised. I swung my flashlight toward them. Light. The nearest figure recoiled, dissipating slightly. I realized that the truck's lights and any source of brightness could push them back, even if temporarily. With renewed determination, I slammed the truck into reverse, sliding backward uncontrollably, narrowly missing a massive, glowing shadow. Each time I illuminated a figure, it vanished slightly, giving me precious seconds. The rest stop loomed closer. I needed to enter it, or the figures would overwhelm me. Every second felt like hours. The whispers intensified, shrill, chanting my name in hollow echoes. I slammed the truck into the rest stop entrance, the icy ground giving way to a screeching crunch of metal and ice. The doors of the building were ajar, flickering with dim green light. I leapt out, adrenaline fueling every movement, and slammed the doors behind me. Inside, the air was thick, cold, and oppressive. The walls were lined with strange symbols carved into the wood, faintly glowing the same green as the highway lights. The whispers followed me, bouncing off the walls, surrounding me from every angle. I could feel the figures pressing against the building, testing the doors, stretching through the cracks. I noticed a narrow hallway leading deeper into the rest stop. A staircase descended into darkness. It felt like the only way forward, the only chance to escape the highway and the endless pursuit. Every instinct told me to run, but every sound, the scraping of nails on walls, the hollow whispers, reminded me I was not alone. I gripped a heavy flashlight like a weapon and descended, each step echoing unnaturally. The temperature dropped, frost forming on the walls. Shadows danced along the corners, distorted and faceless, reaching for me without touching. I realized this wasn't just a building. It was alive, a trap designed to consume the weak and curious. The staircase opened into a large, cavernous room. The green glow emanated from cracks in the floor, pulsating like a heartbeat. I realized the figures weren't just pursuing. They were feeding on fear, drawing power from the space itself. I tried to remain calm, repeating the mantra I had whispered earlier in the truck, focusing on light and presence. One of the figures approached, its faceless void now fully visible, stretching unnaturally toward me. I swung the flashlight, and it recoiled, letting out a soundless scream that vibrated through my chest. The room seemed to warp. Pillars elongated, walls bent, and the ceiling twisted like liquid. Every step I took felt heavier, as though gravity itself had been altered to trap me. I could see dozens of figures in the shadows, some partially transparent, observing, waiting for a moment of weakness. At the center of the room was a glowing portal, swirling green and black, radiating cold. I understood instinctively. This was the source, the heart of the nightmare. If I didn't reach it, I would never leave. Summoning every ounce of courage, I ran, ignoring the hands that brushed against my arms, the whispers that clawed at my mind. Light became my shield, the portal my only hope for escape. I reached the portal and felt an icy wind rush from it, pulling at my clothes and hair. The shadows surged, trying to drag me back. I swung the flashlight in all directions, creating a protective barrier of light. Each flicker pushed the figures away slightly, giving me just enough space. I jumped into the swirling green abyss. Instantly, I felt weightlessness, a strange pulling sensation like being stretched between worlds. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, but then began to fade. My vision blurred, and a sensation of motion took over, twisting, spinning, falling through infinite cold darkness. When I finally landed, I was outside, the night sky above me clear for the first time in hours. The highway was frozen and silent, but no figures in sight. My truck was gone, leaving only tire marks in the snow. I collapsed, shivering violently, tears freezing on my cheeks. Though I had escaped, the whispers remained faintly in my mind. I could still feel the cold, the weight of unseen eyes, the knowledge that the highway had marked me. Survival had come at a cost. I would never drive through northern Ontario again without fear of the unseen. In the days following the incident, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that frozen highway, surrounded by the green glow and faceless figures. I researched Highway 11, discovering reports of disappearances, strange sightings, and unexplained deaths over decades. It became clear that this was no coincidence. The highway itself seemed cursed, a liminal space where something ancient and malevolent hunted travelers in winter. Survivors rarely spoke, afraid of disbelief or ridicule. I understood why. I had narrowly escaped, and the memory haunted me. I began to notice subtle signs in daily life, shadows moving strangely, reflections not matching reality, whispers when the wind blew. I realized the figures had not entirely let me go. They lingered, patient, waiting for a moment of weakness to draw me back. My life changed. I refused night driving, avoided isolated roads, and carried a flashlight at all times. The highway had claimed my innocence and left me hyper-aware of every shadow, every flicker of green light. I could never forget that night. The frozen highway incident would remain with me forever, a reminder that some places are alive, and some horrors are patient, watching, waiting. Months later, I returned to the site with a friend during daylight, hoping rationality would dissipate fear. The highway appeared normal, silent and still, with no trace of the green glow or figures. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every tree, every snowdrift seemed to hide something. I warned my friend not to linger, recounting the ordeal. They laughed nervously, chalking it up to imagination. But I saw a flicker of something in the distance, a figure standing perfectly still, hooded, faceless, watching. My blood ran cold. Even now, I feel the pull of that highway in dreams. The ice, the whispers, the cold weight of unseen eyes. I survived physically, but the figures remain eternal and patient, waiting for travelers who think they can ignore the unknown. If you ever drive through northern Ontario in winter, heed my warning. The highway isn't empty, and the cold isn't just weather. There are watchers, faceless and relentless, marking anyone who dares traverse their domain. Curiosity or misjudgment could trap you, body and soul, in a frozen nightmare. I escaped that night, but I know others will not. The frozen highway incident is real. I am living proof, and I will never forget. I tried to rationalize the figure as a trick of shadows, but the whispers grew louder, seeming to come from the walls themselves. The air grew colder, thick with an unnatural dampness that clung to my skin. I motioned to my partner, but she was farther ahead, oblivious. When I tried to call her back, my voice was swallowed again. The shadow had moved closer, but silently, without a single sound. I froze, headlamp shaking in my hands. Suddenly, a faint green glow appeared deeper in the tunnel. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, casting distorted reflections on the wet walls. The shadow darted toward it, then paused, as if feeding from the light. My stomach churned. I realized the glow was the mind's essence, the source of its power, and the shadow, its guardian. I had two choices: retreat and risk losing my partner, or follow the glow and confront the horror. My curiosity won, as always. I cautiously advanced, each step amplified by the echoing mine, every creak of the old wooden supports sounding like a scream. The tunnel seemed alive, shifting subtly. Walls narrowed and widened unpredictably. I knew the shadow was studying me, learning my behavior, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I tried to rationalize the figure as a trick of shadows, but the whispers grew louder, seeming to come from the walls themselves. The air grew colder, thick with an unnatural dampness that clung to my skin. I motioned to my partner, but she was farther ahead, oblivious. When I tried to call her back, my voice was swallowed again. The shadow had moved closer, but silently, without a single sound. I froze, headlamp shaking in my hands. Suddenly, a faint green glow appeared deeper in the tunnel. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, casting distorted reflections on the wet walls. The shadow darted toward it, then paused, as if feeding from the light. My stomach churned. I realized the glow was the mind's essence, the source of its power, and the shadow its guardian. I had two choices: retreat and risk losing my partner, or follow the glow and confront the horror. My curiosity won, as always. I cautiously advanced, each step amplified by the echoing mine, every creak of the old wooden supports sounding like a scream. The tunnel seemed alive, shifting subtly. Walls narrowed and widened unpredictably. I knew the shadow was studying me, learning my behavior, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I finally reached a large chamber. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and the floor was slick with moisture. The green glow emanated from a pit at the center, a deep, bottomless shaft. The shadow lingered at the edge, its faceless void pulsing as if anticipating my approach. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but something, curiosity, foolish bravery, or both, pushed me forward. I stepped closer to the pit, my reflection distorted in puddles of black water. Then I heard a faint scraping behind me. I spun. Nothing. But the sound grew louder, like thousands of nails across stone. The shadow split into two, then three, each faceless figure moving silently and unnaturally, their motions jerky and inhuman. Panic surged, but I forced myself to focus. I remembered the tales from miners long gone. The mine had a guardian spirit, or so they said. Those who disrespected it vanished. I realized too late that curiosity alone was disrespect. I had to act. I shined my headlamp directly into the central pit, hoping the light would disrupt the entities, even temporarily. The shadows hissed, recoiling, their presence pressing on my mind like ice. I could feel the weight of centuries, the mine itself bending to their will. The mine trembled as if it were alive, groaning and shifting. I stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding a falling rock. The shadows surged forward, drawn to the light, but unable to pass its threshold. I realized the glow was both their power source and their vulnerability. I heard my partner scream from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. I ran toward the sound, feeling the walls close in, the shadows slicing the air with invisible fingers. Every step brought a chilling realization. This place was designed to trap the living, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. I reached a side passage and found her standing frozen, staring at another void in the wall. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the green glow, lips whispering inaudible words. I grabbed her arm, shaking her awake. The shadows noticed, spinning toward us with unnatural speed. We sprinted together, headlamps slicing the darkness. The mine twisted behind us, tunnels elongating impossibly. The shadows followed, persistent, relentless. But the light kept them at bay. Every corridor was a test, every junction a puzzle designed to slow and frighten us. Finally, we saw the exit, a faint light at the far end. I surged forward, adrenaline masking the icy fear gripping my chest. But as we approached, I realized the mine wasn't done. The exit shimmered, unreal, and for a heartbeat, I feared it might vanish entirely. We reached the exit, the light solidifying into daylight. The air outside was crisp, ordinary, yet the weight of the mine clung to us. We collapsed on the snow-dusted ground, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. The mine behind us looked abandoned, silent, as though nothing had occurred. I dared to glance back. The entrance shimmered slightly, faint green light leaking from cracks. I felt eyes on me. The shadows, patient, observing, judging. The mine had allowed us to leave, but it had not released us. We were marked. We tried to report our experience, but authorities dismissed our claims as hallucinations induced by long exposure, isolation, or gas. Even my partner hesitated to speak, haunted by visions she couldn't articulate. That night, I dreamed of the shadows, the green glow, and the pit that seemed bottomless. I woke sweating, realizing the mine wasn't just a location, it was a living trap, and we were among the few to escape. Others had vanished, leaving only whispers and distorted tales. The abandoned mines of Sudbury are not just historical relics. They are alive, feeding on fear, punishing curiosity. If you ever find yourself near their dark entrances, remember this. Some curiosity costs more than knowledge. Some minds are not meant to be explored. Weeks later, I returned to study maps of the mine. Every attempt to chart tunnels led to inconsistencies. The passages shifted, lengths changed, and rooms appeared or vanished on paper. It became clear the mine was not static. It adapted, remembering explorers, punishing or testing them. I began noticing subtle distortions at home. Shadows lingered longer, reflections in mirrors didn't match reality, whispers surfaced in quiet moments. I realized the mine had imprinted on me. It followed me in some small, creeping way. Determined to understand, I revisited old miner journals. Stories of sudden disappearances, miners driven mad, and those who returned but were never the same, confirmed my worst fears. The shadows were guardians, feeding on those who trespassed in their domain. One night, I awoke to hear faint scraping outside my window. My heart froze. I shined a flashlight. Nothing. Yet the whispers began. Familiar. Chilling. The mine had not forgotten. I knew then that the abandoned mines of Sudbury weren't just history. They were eternal. They existed to test, punish, and trap. And the shadows, faceless and patient, would never stop. I tried to block it out, refusing to think about the mine. But dreams became vivid. The green glow, the pit, the faceless shadows. Each night, they came closer, whispering my name, recounting my fear, measuring my resolve. I returned to the surface entrance during daylight, trying to reconcile what I had experienced. The mine looked harmless, quiet, yet instinct screamed otherwise. I felt the weight of unseen eyes, and the faintest pulse of green light seemed to flicker from below the snow. I tried to warn friends. Few believed me. Some laughed, some avoided me. Yet I could see it in their peripheral vision, faint distortions, suggesting the mine reached far beyond its physical boundaries. I realized then that the mine didn't just consume bodies, it claimed minds, seeping into reality itself. The shadows weren't just confined to Sudbury. They were patient, adaptable, waiting for anyone foolish enough to trespass. Every snowstorm, every darkened industrial site, every abandoned shaft reminded me of the mine. The whispers continued, growing faint but insistent. Months passed, but the mine's influence lingered. At night, I would wake to find shadows shifting unnaturally in my apartment. Objects subtly moved, reflections in windows were wrong, faint green glows flickered across walls. I tried to rationalize, but the memories of the pit, the faceless shadows, and the endless tunnels were vivid. I knew they were real. One evening, I received a strange message from a fellow geologist. "We found the green light again. Don't go near it." Panic set in. I realized the mine had drawn attention again, and its reach had extended. I returned one last time, standing outside the entrance during dusk. I felt the shadows watching, the mine breathing beneath my feet. The green glow flickered once, then vanished. I understood. It was patient, eternal. It didn't need to consume everyone immediately. It only needed to wait. I documented everything, trying to warn others. The local authorities dismissed my claims. Tourists and adventurers sometimes wandered too close, drawn to the lore, the eerie glow, the abandoned shafts. I knew the mine would claim them, one by one, in silence. The faceless shadows had become a part of my life. Even away from Sudbury, I noticed them at night in empty streets, dark alleys, and isolated industrial areas. They were patient, eternal, and adaptable. I realized that curiosity and exploration came with a cost. The mine was a lesson in respect and fear. Those who failed to understand would vanish, leaving only stories, whispers, and fleeting glimpses of green light. Years later, I still dream of the mine. The green glow, the pit, the faceless figures, they haunt me in sleep and waking moments alike. I've tried to distance myself from abandoned sites, from curiosity that draws me near the unknown. The abandoned mines of Sudbury are alive. They remember, they test, they punish. The shadows are not just guardians. They are patient, waiting for the next intruder, measuring fear and preparing to consume. If you ever encounter an abandoned mine in northern Ontario or hear tales of green light flickering from deep underground, heed the warning. Curiosity can cost you more than knowledge. The shadows are patient, and the mind's eternal. I survived, but the experience marked me forever. Every snowstorm, every quiet industrial site, every abandoned tunnel reminds me, the mind does not forgive. It does not forget. And those faceless shadows are still waiting, patient and